Hello, everyone. How you guys doing? Hopefully, you're having a wonderful day. Today, we are here with the annual, mostly annual. I will start by saying I did this a year and 2.5 months later, so we're going to say 15 months in between the last one and this one. So these aren't perfectly annualized statistics. Keep that in mind as we go through it. I'm sure I'll mention it more than enough, but it's made a return. The PSA Soccer Pop Report we're reporting on the populations, how they've changed over time. And this is, personally my favorite thing I do any year. I really enjoy this. We used to do it every 3 months, but now that we sort of have an idea where things stand, I figure a year makes sense. I'll try to make sure this is more on the spot for next year. But hopefully you enjoy these. If you do, make sure to leave a like, share this with whoever you feel would like to see it. I think it's a very useful thing for us here in the soccer hobby, as we're quite new. We don't have the 30 years of grading that something like baseball does. So being able to sort of tap into how things are moving, I think is very helpful, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to start early on and move towards the more current years. Anyways, let's go ahead and get rolling here. So we start with Stanley Matthews in 1934. As you can see here, he has 4 different options, at least that I'm tracking. He has more, certainly. But these are the 4 in the pop report that I kept an eye on. And as you can see down at the bottom, basically, we'll be looking at mostly the right side of this Excel sheet and taking a peek at that. So in terms of total change, I'll just go to the far right and we'll talk about that, and then we'll break down anything else that seems interesting. For the 15-month total change, the RJ Hill Popular Footballers had an increase of 4. The Ardath was an increase of 16, only seemingly 1 in a PSA 7 to 10 grade, so most of this was coming in the mid to low end in terms of grade. And the Carreras went up 4 for the large version and 5 for the small. Ultimately, not anything too crazy going on here, especially for England. You would kind of assume that, there's always going to be more kind of coming to market, but not a mass amount more. All of these between 5 and 8% over the last 15 months, which if you annualize that, maybe it's closer to, 4 to 7%, somewhere in there. So nothing too crazy there, and mostly in sort of medium grades, as we can see here. PSA 3 through 6 seem to be where most of the growth was. We'll move on now to Puskás in 1946. It's kind of a big jump. I will say that I added quite a few players before this for next year. I added Fritz Walter, Sindelar, Dixie Dean. I think there was another one in there, but I can't quite remember. If there's any players that you think I should track, do let me know. Preferably, top 100 all-time players with notable rookies would be ideal. I don't want to track something that's only a pop 1 and basically never going to change, but if it is actually changing and you want me to, potentially add it to the list, do tell in the comments below. But here, as you can see, we have early Puskáses. So we have the 46-47 Nanina that had a total increase of 4. And notably, there was 1 PSA 7 through 10, 2 in the medium grade range, and another one in the PSA Authentic to 2 range. So 4 there is a decent increase in terms of percentages. Again, if you annualize that, maybe it's only 3 in the 12-month period, and maybe we got another one in the 15 months. So, 3 a year is nothing crazy, really, but ultimately, when pops are that low, it does seem drastic in terms of percent increase, but ultimately, 1 every 4 months isn't anything crazy. For the Bolliger, 1950, there was actually 0 that got graded over the last 15 months. For the 1954 AMBC, sort of the first early, more, graded copy that's more attainable. This went up 7, which was a 12% increase, again, over 15 months, so probably closer to like 10% over the year. And then down at the Heinerle level, something is wildly off in terms of total change. I can assure you that that won't be the case for the ones to come. I must have missed that. But as you can see, 9% change, so let's just assume that the total amount graded is probably somewhere around 8 or 9. So ultimately that's increasing at about 7 a year, which isn't anything crazy for the Heinerles, which are generally attainable. And most all of this is occurring in the med to low end in terms of grading. As you can see, the AMBC did get a +1 in the high PSA 7 through 10 range, But other than that, most of this is going on in the mid to low end. On to Pele, and Pele's one that I'm certainly going to add some more on. I haven't figured out exactly which ones I'm going to add, so again, if you have any ideas, do let me know. What comes to mind for me is like the Vav, the Americana, probably Aquarellas as well. Pele should be much more thorough, but early on when I was doing this, I didn't have a good sense of what was worth adding, what wasn't, and so I only have 3 here that I felt were, pretty decent ones to track. So we have the Alifa, that had a total increase of 32, which is quite substantial. That's 29% over the last 15 months. Annualized, probably closer to 25%. And that's about, close to 2 a month, it would seem. Notably, no PSA 8 through 10, so that stays relatively similar. Quite a lot of mid-grades, 25% increase there, and in terms of PSA 2 through 4, a 40% increase, which is quite substantial. But, there's been a lot of those throughout the years, and it isn't showing any signs of slowing for the moment, but how long will that last? Time will tell. In terms of the titulares, there was 10 graded for the number 50, the horizontal image there, and there was 8 for the headshot. I say 8, it's actually 9 for the headshot. Again, annualized, probably closer to 7/8 a year for the 2 of them. And, again, it's a decent percent increase, but ultimately 7 to 8 a year isn't really all that much in the grand scheme of things. Again, here, most of this increase happening, especially for the titulares in low grade, PSA 2 through 4. There was only 1 graded in a PSA 5 or higher for either of them, so that is fairly notable. As we go onward, we will go to Eusebio here. Not going to talk too much about the ones individually, because as you can tell, for the first, 5 that we have here, none of them were graded. I did add the Astros to this, but the Astros is not within this image, so do keep that in mind, but none of them are graded in the pop ranges we were looking at, so ultimately doesn't quite matter. For Eusebio, maybe I changed the pop ranges to include PSA 1s and authentics, because there are quite a few of his early ones that mostly grade at very low. When it comes to the 63 Calciatores, that's where you'll see a little bit more in terms of population increase, but really not a ton, truthfully. The blues had 5 apiece for both the blue name and the Velita back, and the yellow had 4 for the yellow name and 1 for the yellow name with a Velita back. Again, most of the population here growing in PSA 2 to 4 range. There were a couple here and there in the 5 to 7 range, but ultimately no PSA 8s or 9s/10s graded over the last 15 months here. Again, 15 months, so, you could probably subtract 1 and annualize that for the Calciatores, about 4 a year for the more attainable versions. The yellow being at 4 is a little surprising, considering the blues were at 5 apiece for each of those, but ultimately it's a small sample size here. Then we move to George Best, 1964 Barrett & Co. Here we see a total increase of 13, which is, decent, but ultimately we're looking at about 100 graded, so, we were probably around 85 to 90 last year. We have 13 graded over the last 15 months, which again, annualized, maybe 10 a year or so, and a total increase of 14%. Again, here, no PSA 8s through 10. 16 of those had been graded prior, so that's notable. Decent amount graded in the 5 through 7 range. Granted, the tobacco cards generally do grade, decently well, so I don't think that's all too surprising. That is where a majority of the population lies here, and PSA 2 to 4 upped 7.6%, which again annualized would be closer to 6%, which again is not all that crazy. We move on to Franz Beckenbauer here, his 1965 issues. You could add in the Grout Golds, but those don't really move all that much. But beyond that, we have the Bergman 65 Foosball. This increased a total of 17% over the last 15 months, so, closer to 14% over the year. And then in terms of total change, 17 as well there. As for the perforated Sicker Verlag, that was an increase of 5 in total, which is around the same percent, and the TTT Tausen Tolatore went up 3 in totality. Here you do have a little bit more in terms of PSA 8 through 10s. There was 2 Bergmans in 8 through 10 grade that were graded, and there was another TTT in that range as well. In terms of percentage growth, the PSA 5 through 7s for the Bergman also upped a decent bit there, 22%. So, decent bit in regard to how that's grown over the last 15 months. But a lot of low grades, all of those being between 14 and 25% overall. So the Bergmans, still coming out. It's always tricky, and with a lot of this vintage stuff, you do wonder how much of that PSA 5 and above grading is actually stuck copies that aren't graded stuck because, PSA's just missed some sort of removal on the back or whatever it may be. They've been pretty poor about that lately. And, so anytime you're looking at these, do make sure to thoroughly check them before purchasing if that's something you care about. Beyond that, Gerd Muller in 1965 as well, similar releases for him. In terms of total pop increase here, his were a little less measurable compared to the Beckenbauers. He only had an increase of 10 Bergmans in 2 through 10 grade, 7 Sicker Verlag perforated, and 0 of his TTT number 223. So interesting to see the dichotomy between those two. Ultimately, you could probably imagine that the true number's somewhere in the middle of him and Beckenbauer. I would assume that those are both getting graded if you have them. But ultimately, PSA still isn't over in Germany, so maybe people are saving their Gerd Mullers. I'm not quite sure. Here, no PSA 8 through 10s graded. There were a decent amount of 5s through 7 for the Bergman, though, up 25% there. And other than that, it's mostly low grades in regard to what's been graded. We'll go back in time a little bit. For some reason, Bobby Moore, I have him after these, despite being earlier. As you can see here, only 2/3 cards imaged here, and the main one being the Bazooka. That actually had an increase of 7 in total in PSA 2 through 4 grades, so decent increase. But again, English release, 7 in 2 through 10 grades being graded over the last 15 months. It's like 6 a year or so. It's really not that many. Ultimately, still impressive to see how low that is at this point in time. On to Cruyff, 1967, 68, 69, 70, wherever. These span quite a few years, but these are all kind of seen as Cruyff rookies, I would say. In terms of pop change, the Sicker Verlag went up 9 in total over the last 15 months. The Palarex up 5, and the Vanderhoot up 21. So you're looking at, a decent increase there percentage-wise. The Sicker Verlag here looking like the highest jump, but still in totality of the grades we're looking at, it is the lowest, so that sort of makes sense, given that, it has a lower starting point in terms of overall pop. Again, if you want to annualize it, probably about 7 to 8 Sicker Verlags over the last year, 4 to maybe 5 Palarex is probably closer to 4, and then the Vanderhoot's probably closer to 17 or so. So ultimately, having, 35 Cruyffs over the last 15 months, it's about 2 a month. That's not bad at all, I would say. And in terms of pops, it is notable that the Sicker Verlag did have 2 super high grades get graded over the last 15 months, 66% increase there. And the Vanderhoot also had quite a few in PSA 8 through 10 grade. Palarex did not, and still a decent amount of grading going on in the mid and low grades as well for those 3 there. On to Platini in 1974, you have his true rookie here, which in terms of total growth went up 7 over the last 15 months, so that's about 6 a year, 1 every other month in a PSA 2 through 10 grade. Actually very surprising. I would say this is one that kind of, I didn't look too deep into the numbers before recording this, but as we go through it here, that's a little surprising to me. This was one that was getting graded quite a bit and in pretty decent grade. Now, notably, there was a 21% increase in PSA 8 through 10s, so that would mean, 2 or 3 of those, probably closer to 3 of those got graded over the last 15 months, and only a couple within the PSA 5 through 7 and 2 through 4 ranges. So interesting to see that. Again, that might speak to PSA not being the best at looking at the backs and making sure it all looks good. Also could speak towards, potentially good removals by certain people. I'm not quite sure whether I should blame PSA or applaud whoever's pulling it from the album, or maybe there was, a few that were just lying barren in really high grade. I'm not quite sure, truthfully. So worth noting, but I did find this to be pretty surprising in a good way, that's only up 6%, 7% over the last 15 months, which would be closer to like 5% annually. On to Maradona in 1977 here through 1979. We have quite a few issues. You have his 77 disc, which had a total change of 11. However, all of those were in PSA 2 through 4 grades. So, a lot of lower grades coming on in for the disc, which makes sense. Those are pretty beaten up at this point. The 1978 crack headshot here at number 2 had a total increase of 11 as well. Interesting to see those so close. This was mostly in mid to low grades here. No 8 through 10s getting graded. Granted, that's a super tough grade for any of these cards, really, other than the Calciatore. Then beyond that, you have his crack cartoon, which only had 4 in terms of total grades in, 2 through 10, which again, I find that to be really surprising. Now, notably here, there was actually a high grade coming on in the PSA 8 through 10 range. There's no 10, so it was either an 8 or a 9, but nonetheless, no 5s through 7, and I guess presumably only 3 in the PSA 2 through 4 range. I found that to be pretty surprising. Beyond that, the Estampas only had an increase of 4 as well, which again, I thought was pretty surprising, given that there were 40 or 35 up until this point, and we went 15 months and only, got an issue or issue graded every 4 months. I mean, that's kind of crazy. For these, it was a pop 5 through 7. There was 1 increase, and then 2 through 4, there was 3. And then finally, the Calciatore had a total increase of 37, which, just interesting to compare that. There was a decent bit more Calciatores graded than any of the Argentinian editions that we've seen prior combined. Here there was a couple high grades that came on in, a 4% increase there, and then an 11 and 12% increase for the med and lower grades, as you can see. So, again, kind of impressed with Maradona. I didn't look at these numbers too closely before I started this, but I'm surprised to see all of these at around 10%. The crack disc did have a decent percent increase, but still only 11 in total. The other copies, I guess I'm surprised to see the crack is so high compared to the others. Not sure quite what to make of that, but ultimately interesting nonetheless. And if you annualize those numbers, again, most of them anywhere between 6 and 9 to 10% if you take out the disc. So I thought that was pretty impressive. Beyond that, Franco Baresi here, we have his Edis and his Calciatore. This could be a player that I also add in another item or two for him. And in terms of the two we have here, the Calciatore only had an increase of 3 in total, which were all in PSA 2 through 4 grades. And that's the Edis, in case I said Calciatore, which I think I did. And then the Calciatore on the right actually had an increase of 11. A couple of those being in high grade, and then a decent amount in 5 through 7s, and a couple as well in the 2 to 4 range. Under Ruud Gullit here from 1979-80 Voetbal. In totality, he only had 4 of these graded, which percentage-wise is a pretty decent increase, 23%. But again, annualized, maybe 3 a year isn't all too much in the grand scheme of things. Kind of impressive again. Early Voetbal and also German issues. Just a lot of the 70s and 80s across Europe is generally not easy, I would say. Maybe if, going outside Italy, of course. But only 4 here, which is pretty impressive, and all coming mostly in low grade, but also a PSA 5 through 7 was graded, but only 1 seemingly. Then we move to Lothar Matthäus's 1979-80 Americana. This had no increase at all, which, if you follow this sticker, is probably to be expected. Pretty hard one to get in any non-stuck grade, but even stuck, it's a difficult one. So ultimately, that's not all too surprising, but interesting nonetheless. Marco van Basten, he went up 5 in total, which is, sizable considering the pop, but still nothing all that crazy for a sticker that's this coveted. One of the chase stickers of the Panini era, I would say. Obviously quite rare, great player, all that fun stuff. No high grades were graded, but a few PSA 5s through 7, along with a couple PSA 2 through 4. So, some decent grades coming on in there, but ultimately about 4 a year, which again isn't anything all too wild, especially for a sticker of that magnitude. We now move on to 85, starting with Paolo Maldini. We have his Calciatore first, which had a total increase of 9. Again, not that much. A sticker that if you add up the pops in 5 through 10 grade, I mean, we're looking at, close to 130, 135, something like that. So, I mean, ultimately, to see an increase of only 9, just 7%, again, annualize it'd be closer to 6%, maybe even a little lower. I mean, that's not bad at all. Again, based off what we saw in the booming days of pre-modern and whatnot, there was just tons of them getting graded, and it felt like there was just going to be boatloads forever. But obviously, as you can tell, not quite the case. The Calciatore Flash only had an increase of 1, which was a 5% increase, but ultimately, I mean, only 1 is very impressive. And the Forza Goal had 0 graded in 5 through 10 grade. But, a lot of Forzas are lower grade. Granted, again, I think it's like a pop 10 in total, so it's not like there's loads of them in authentic through 4, but there are a few down there that we are not capturing here, and that's okay. I'll give myself a pass on that, but still only 2 in a 5 through 10 grade, which is just crazy. Moving on to Baggio, here, same sort of releases for him. We have the Calciatore, which in total grew by 11. Mostly in mid to low grade, or I guess just mid grade here, since we're only capturing 5 and above. For the Calciatore Flash, only 2 here, which again, super impressive. I mean, I just, I always think back to the booming days, and I just saw the Flashes on auction a lot. It made me think that they were plentiful, and to only have 2 graded is pretty crazy, I think. I mean, at least to my eyes. And then for the Forza Goal, more Baggios in high grade, which is interesting than Maldini, but the Baggio increased by 1. So ultimately, percentage-wise, it beats the bunch here, but in terms of total grades, obviously it is the lowest, and that came in a PSA 5/6 grade. Moving on, but staying in 1985, we have this Eric Cantona. This went from a pop, what are we looking at in total? 50, I believe. So it was a pop 44, now it's a pop 50 in 2 through 10 grade. As you can see here in terms of the grades that actually came in, most of this happened in the PSA 2 through 4 range. Basically, there was only 1 graded in 5 through 10, so a lot of this was on the lower end of the grading spectrum for him. Percentage-wise, again, annualized, you're looking at like an 11% increase and probably 5 a year, which isn't all that much, especially when you consider that those were all low grade. Continuing further, we have Dennis Bergkamp. This one was surprising because, as you can tell, the total pop on the left is 42, and not one was graded over the last 15 months, at least in the grades that I'm tracking. Basically everything other than, PSA 1s, Authentics, and 1.5s. So pretty interesting to see that stay the same. Beyond that, we have Zinedine Zidane. This sticker went up 14 over the last 15 months. So again, annualize that, maybe 12 a year, about 10% increase, which ultimately is a very doable increase in terms of a iconic sticker for one of the best players of the pre-modern era, maybe the best, depending on how you rank them. Most of this came in PSA 2 to 4 range. That seems to be about, 9 of them in that grading range, and then 5 were graded in a PSA 5 through 7 range. Ultimately, no PSA 8, 9, or 10s were graded over the last 15 months, which again is just super, super impressive to see from the perspective of someone looking to capture these in high grade. Doesn't appear all that easy. Beyond that, we have R9 here. A few different issues for them, so we'll take a look at all of them. The Copa do Mundo Alval from 1994 in total had 0 graded, at least in the populations that we're covering here, 3 through 10. A lot of those do show up in lower grade if they show up. I say a lot, again, there's not many, but when they do show up, typically it's low grade. We have the Voteball number 78 headshot, probably the most iconic R9 rookie. This one up 16 in total, which, for a sticker that's over pop 220 or so, from the pops that I'm tracking, only having 16 over 15 months, about 12 a year again, not crazy at all. Like, not crazy at one a month, and that's nothing really. Ultimately, there were some high grade 17% increase there, so there's probably a few, and then a decent amount in 6 through 8 grade there with a 12% increase. Beneath that, 91 football, the sort of sparkly sticker from the same set. This one went up 9 in total, and most of those coming in low to med grade, which is interesting to see. And then 24 of the Mundo Deportivos, which is a sizable amount, but we've seen a lot of these sort of come out the last few years, so maybe we're still sort of catching the tail end of that. We'll have to see how that progresses into next year. And then finally, the Nike promo, 0 graded for that, which is certainly something of note, at least I would think. So ultimately for R9, 50 graded over the last 15 months, which ultimately for a player of this stature isn't all that much, especially when it's spread across 5 different copies here. Moving on, we have the Thierry Henry options from 1996. We start with his foot that increased a total of 11 for that in particular, most of which were in low to med grade, although there were a couple high grades coming on in here. The Mejores Equipos de Europa, there's a Spanish version and a Russian version. As you can see, the Spanish is more common. This increased 25 in total, which is pretty sizable, 25% over the last 15 months. Again, if you annualize that, closer to 20%, but still pretty sizable. And a decent amount of those coming in high grade, even med grade and low grade, but most of the percentage increases in high grade, so those are still coming out in good condition. And then the Russian version only had an increase of 3, and seemingly all of that was in PSA 5 through 7, which, decent grade for those, but only 3 over 15 months certainly isn't all that. Next, we have Xavi's rookie options in 1998 on the left, starting with the Mundi Chromo that increased 11 in total, and most of that was in med to med high grade. There does seem to be a couple in PSA 9 to 10 range, but not many. The Este sticker only increased 1 in PSA 5 through 10 grade, which is super surprising considering that is from the populations I'm tracking, was about a pop 100 going into this year, and to only increase 1 in 15 months is shocking, really. The Panini football card that you see at number 3 increased 14 in total, most of those coming in 5 through 8 grade. And then finally, the Panini Liga from 1998, sort of the rarest sticker for Xavi. This increased 5 in total, which is a pretty sizable percentage increase for a sticker that previously only had, I think, 13 graded. 13. So it's up to 18 now, which is certainly something. One of those was graded in PSA 9 to 10 range, and then a lot of them were in the 5 to 6 range. Then we move on to Ronaldinho. Only 3 here, which, I might have to eat my words here. I've been talking down this sticker a little bit just because, I always just assume there's more out there and, they'll find their way out. But only 3 in 15 months is a crazy amount to be graded, a crazy few amount, obviously. 8% increase, which does make it seem more sizable, but 3 in total for a player of this stature. Granted, it's only tracking from PSA 5 and above, but still, certainly impressive to say the least. As you can tell, a couple of those did get graded in the 7 to 8 range, so some high grades there, and then another one in PSA 5 to 6. But ultimately, super surprising to see how few of those were graded. Along with that, in the same vein, 0 of these Zlatans were graded over the last 15 months, which is someone that doesn't own the sticker and would like to. That's super depressing. But as you can tell, before this, we were tracking it, and 15 months ago, there was a total of 33 in this grade range, and 15 months later, there are still 33. So, that is quite the rare sticker there, at least so it would appear. And, I certainly would agree. I'm not disputing the numbers by any means. On to Cristiano Ronaldo, we have his Mega Cracks card along with his Panini football sticker. The card increased 24 in total in the populations that I am tracking, and the sticker increased by 19. Both similar percentages. Again, if you annualize that, closer to like a 7 to 8% increase over the last 15 months, or over the 12 months, you get the idea. If you annualize it again, I constantly keep talking about it, but I think it's important to know that these numbers are a bit lower than they seem if you make it a year long. In terms of the percentage growth here, it seems that for the sticker, a lot of that occurred in the PSA 5 to 6 range. Still a decent amount in the 7 to 8 range, but most of it percentage-wise in the 5 to 6 range. And then for the card, a decent amount graded in the 7 to 8 range, at least comparatively to where it was 15 months ago. And then we look at Iniesta's breakdown here. The Monday Chromo increased in total by 33, which for a card that was graded as much as that has been, percentage-wise, only an 8% increase, nearly a 9% increase. For the Superliga Panini Sports number 392, actually a surprising amount of increase here, 30 in total, which, previously this was probably closer to 90 in total for the grades that we're tracking here, and now it's all the way up to, about 120. Surprisingly as well, a lot of these in high grade PSA 10 pop increased by 32%. That was a sticker that for the longest time was super, super low, and then it had a big find and seemingly more of the find, or maybe a different find sort of coming to light. But decent percent increase in both 9s and 10s for that sticker. And the headshot only had 1 graded, but that also was a PSA 10. So pretty big time headshot sticker, but only 1 compared to the 30 for the action shot, which is just crazy. Now, the headshot is sort of an update edition sticker, so it is a shorter print edition that certainly is rarer, but a 30 to 1 is pretty nutty, and as you can tell, the general ratio is not that, because the 392 has about 120 graded in total in these ranges, and the headshot has 25, so the ratio before this 15-month was about a 4 to 1, and then to have a 30 to 1 in terms of grading increase is just super strange, but ultimately that's how it played out. Then we get to the boatload of Messis here, so I'm going to try to run you through them. I'm not going to get too into the weeds on each one, but of course you can look at the numbers yourself. As we can tell, the Monday Chromo increased by a total of 73, which was about a 10% over the last 15 months. The Top Liga increased by 6 for the non-foil and 10 for the foil, which are surprisingly low numbers for those, but nonetheless, that's where it stands. Notably, none of these first 3 had any PSA 10s graded, mostly 8s and 7s and maybe a couple 9s. The 71 bis, number 4 here on this line of Excel sheet, this went for a total increase of 23, which was a 12% increase. There was a PSA 10 graded and a decent amount of 9s as well that came on into the pop this last 15 months. Then for the Mega Cracks team set, we'll just go through it. The first ones that I'll be talking about, the ones that don't say Campio, are the Campione. The Blue Mega Cracks team set had an increase of 22 for the Campione and 24 for the Campio. The Green Mega Cracks team set had an increase of 21 for the Campione and 45 for the Campio. And then the White team set had an increase of 66 for both the Campione and Campio. What I will say there is I do wonder how many people are sort of regrading their Campiones to Campio, because there were a lot of Campiones early on that actually were Campios but were graded as Campiones, so there could be some resubmissions there that might take away from one pop report and add to another. So I do find that to be, something to take into account that might not show in this data, but ultimately I really can't track that, but if I could, I would. And then finally, the Este sticker only had an increase of 11 over the last 15 months, which, comparatively to the rest of them, I do find to be quite low, but ultimately most of those stickers were stuck, so I don't think it's all too surprising. In total, 360 Messis graded over the last 15 months, which for as many rookies as he has and for as crazy as the market's gone on his rookie stuff, I think it's reasonable to say the least. In terms of PSA 10s, anything that stands out here, for half of these, there weren't any PSA 10s graded. The Green Campio did go from a Pop 6 to a Pop 9. That was and still is one of the hardest 10s to get, but had a 50% increase there, which is pretty sizable, and also had a 36% increase on the 9s as well. So decent moves up for those. And really here, again, I've already talked about the Este. I guess I'm a little surprised on the Top Ligas that those didn't get graded in more mass. Granted, they aren't as expensive, so there's probably not as much, as much of a fever to send them in. But the 71 bis also only having 23 graded, given the price point on that, is certainly telling, I would say. And we'll move on from Messi now. Only a couple post-Messis again. If you have any ideas of people you want me to add, let me know. I did add Modric for next year, but anyone else besides that, do let me know down below. We have Sergio Ramos here. I have his Top Liga foil that had 0 graded over the last 15 months. It says 100% increase, but pay no mind to that. The total increase was 0, so ultimately that wouldn't make any sense now, would it? The Mega Cracks number 275, this only had an increase of 1 in PSA 8 through 10 grade, which is super, super impressive. Ultimately, that came in a PSA 8 grade, so nothing crazy to see there. And then his Este sticker did have a 9 in total that were graded over the last 15 months. So a decent percent increase there. But ultimately still 9 in total isn't anything all that crazy. And then finally, we'll end with Lewandowski, his 2008 Panini issues. We have his headshot and his action shot. Both of these only increasing by 2, so nothing crazy there to say the least. 3% increase and a 1.3% increase as well, and these mostly occurred in PSA 8 grades. There was a PSA 9 on the action shot, but really impressive to see that barely grow at all, considering the action sticker had a total pop of, like 140 before this last 15-month cycle. Now it only grew by 2 in these grades. But that'll do it for this yearly episode of the PSA Soccer Pop Report, how things are changing, where things are going. Overall, really impressed by, I guess, how few of these items have been graded. In total. I mean, barely anything is, over 10%. There certainly are, exceptions, and there are items that were barely ever graded. So if one does get graded, maybe it's a high percent increase. But ultimately, really, really impressed by how these pops are sort of holding. And I think it goes to show that, there's always going to be more out there for this type of stuff. Like, I would never assume the pops that you're looking at are going to stay the pops forever, because ultimately there's still more of these raw. But I do think that being able to look at how these grow year by year, it gives you an idea of, how much you could expect going forward to some degree. Now, as PSA does get over into Europe, there's going to be a German office soon. And as grading becomes more of a custom thing for them, I mean, there will be more, right? That's always important to state. But for a lot of these, there are significant prices behind a lot of these examples we looked at today, and those significant prices haven't yet pulled them out. Now, ultimately, there will be more pulled out. There's no disputing that. But I think that where it sits right now and what the growth's looking like, it seems very healthy. And at least to me, as someone that does enjoy pre-modern and vintage and this type of stuff, it gives me a lot of certainty that, these things are not going to double, triple, quadruple overnight just because they're worth something. Because as you can tell, like the Messis are worth something. They're not doing that. I mean, there might be 10 or 20 graded a year for some of the examples, maybe 50 for some of the more common ones. But that's Messi, and that's a modern issue. And there's people everywhere looking for them. And sure, there's going to be more, but man, I was super, super shocked to see how some of this stuff has grown or really hadn't grown. And I think, for the segment of sport that I enjoy, and I think a lot of others do, I think it's really encouraging. And, hopefully enjoyed. Again, I enjoy these quite a bit. So if you did enjoy, again, make sure to leave a like. I'd appreciate it greatly. If you want to share this, that'd be great as well. Any thoughts, any players you want me to add, anything you're thinking, would love to hear it down below in a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this every single year, make sure to subscribe. But hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.